Central Berkshire Regional School District on November 14th, 2019 will now come to order at 7:02. The meeting is being audio and videotaped, and if there's anybody in the audience who's doing so, please let us know. All who were able, please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Superintendent Kasner, will you take roll, please?
Yes, I'm like, I don't know all of our members. Oh, no. Mr. Bartel, welcome to the table. Okay, so usually you're also in the audience. So I apologize in advance. Mr. Alford is not here. I have met him before. I'll meet him in the future. Mr. Bartel.
Here.
Congratulations. Welcome. Thank you. Mr. DeFazio.
Here.
Ms. DiTomaso.
Here.
Mr. Emerson.
Here.
Mr. Farley. I don't see Mr. Farley. Okay, Mr. Farley's not here. Ms. Garusha. Here. Did I say your name correctly? Oh, great. Nice to see you. Mr. Hinckley is not here, and he emailed us that he will do his best and sends his regards if he can't make it. Mr. Locatell.
Here.
Ms. Latazori.
Here.
Mr. Peters. Mrs. Tucker.
Here.
I don't see Mr. Wagner. Mr. Wagner's
Oh,
not here.
he texted me, he's going to, he was late in coming home from his vacation.
Okay. Dr. Kraft Reese is here. We have an open seat in Washington. Our municipal rep is at the table. Do we have a new? No.
There is no.
No municipal rep. We're good. CBA rep. Hi, Mr. Hogan. Put that one down. And our student rep. How do I say your name? Savory. So I don't say Faith, but I can say Miss Savory. Okay. So we have our student rep. I apologize that took longer than usual. Nice to see everyone.
And welcome back to Superintendent Kasner. We're happy that you're back. Okay, the first order of business would be the reorganization. So, to that end, I'd like to ask if a member would make a motion to open the floor for nominations for school committee chair.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? I don't see that. Okay, so we're open for nominations.
I nominate Barbara Crabtree for chair.
Second. Second. Okay. Any other nominations?
Move that nominations be closed.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So I can click the speech now. Thank you very much. It was an easy transition thanks to Dick Locatell. He guided me through the whole process, and I appreciate everything that he did for me and will continue to do in his capacity as a school committee member in the future. So thank you, and thank you all. I think we have a great committee, and I look forward to another year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay.
So we don't have to do a ballot vote if there's only one, but we do have to do a vote.
Okay.
And for that
So,
time,
okay. So go back. All those in favor of Barbara Kraft Reese for say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Oh, thank you very much. Okay, now for vice chair, and I was informed by Mr. Locatell that he's stepping down from the position of vice chair, but will remain active in our group. So do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Rich Peters.
Second.
Okay. Any, all those in favor? No.
are there any other nominations?
Any other nominations? Okay. All those in favor of Rich Peters? Aye. Abstentions? Opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Peters.
Very easy bid. Are you in favor? Very easy bid. Okay.
There you go. So at this point that I move that we end the nomination portion of our meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained. Thank you. We're done with that. Now, we can go on and say, are there any responses from the audience?
We have the,
The audience. I know that part.
we have some more votes with the district secretary.
Oh, right. Oh, thank goodness he's here.
Don't-
What do you say?
Right, okay. Okay, we need to appoint a district secretary, so you have to read it.
Be it resolved that Maury Casner be appointed district secretary through November 2020.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Congratulations. Now, the appointment of district treasurer.
Okay. Be it resolved that Richard Jett be appointed district treasurer through November 2020.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. Now, appointment of legal counsels for the district.
Be it resolved that Murphy, Hess, Cheney, and Lahane LLP be appointed special education legal counsel for the Central Berkshire Regional School District from December 1st, 2019 to November 30th, 2020.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Be it resolved that Dr. Betsy Valade, thank you, be appointed physician for Central Berkshire Regional School District from December 1st, 2019 to November 30th, 2020. This is the appointment of a physician for the school district.
Second.
All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now we have subcommittee preferences. There was a form in the packet that was sent to us, both online and in snail mail. And if you have those, could you please send them to me? I have copies. Do you have any extra copies? I'm sure.
Half of them tonight. Just happy. If they're over here.
Okay, so once those subcommittee preferences are in, I will be meeting with the subcommittee chairs and to just go over what our expectations are, priorities are, and then we can move forward. At this point, responses from the audience. Seeing none. Okay, but now student affairs. And welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Faith Sager. The forum has been very busy for the past month. On October 30th, we had NHS inductions, National Honor Society, and the new and senior members helped with parent-teacher conferences on November 6th and November 12th. Also on November 6th, we welcomed a Holocaust survivor, and we held an assembly. Also, starting on November 6th through 9th, some 11th graders took their 10th grade English Mcas as a retake. And also, quiz team sent a group of kids to Westfield State University to participate in a local quiz team show at Schools Match Wits. And they had a bake sale today, and which will continue tomorrow. And also last week, we celebrated National French Week. And recently, we elected some students. Well, they volunteered themselves in teams to play for the Paraprofessional football tournament. They recently got shirts and painted in the event. It's a fundraiser to raise money for cancer. And also, the 11th and 12th graders took their class trip to Salem on the 22nd and 25th, respectively. And NHS National Honor Society is hosting a fundraiser at Lacona called Empty Bowls. They do this almost every year. Our chapter will work together to raise money for people who suffer from food insecurity. And also recently, Drama announced the musical for this year. It's called Once Upon a Mattress. And the junior class is hosting Turkey Fest, which will happen next Friday. It's a talent show that raises money for prom and many other junior activities that will also help with senior year. Theme is America's Got Talent. And also recently, Tribe hosted a pep rally where the school was presented as with a banner that certifies us as a national Relocations champions. And many, since it's coming to the end of fall, many fall sports have ended and the winter sports are beginning to start.
Thank you very much. All right. Secretary's report, are there any corrections to the October 17th minutes? Not, will someone please make a motion to approve the minutes? So we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries, thank you. Okay, financial reports, we have a lot of lots.
Okay. Motion to approve warrant number PR 2020-9, dated November 1st, 2019, previously signed, payroll in the amount of $666,433.19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve warrant number PR 2020-9. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Motion to approve warrant number PR 2020-9D, dated November 1st, 2019, previously signed, accounts payable from agency accounts in the amount of $324,108.90.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve warrant PR 2020-9D. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Motion to approve warrant number AP 2020-10, dated November 1st, 2019, previously signed, and accounts payable in the amount of $4,164,277.69.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for warrant AP 2020-10. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Motion to approve warrant number PR 2020-10, dated November 14th, 2019, payroll in the amount of $641,479.90.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for PR 2020-10. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Motion to approve warrant number PR 2020-10D, dated November 14th, 2019, accounts payable from agency accounts in the amount of $114,801.83.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve warrant PR 2020-10D. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Motion to approve warrant number AP 2020-11, dated November 15th, 2019, accounts payable in the amount of $509,771.28.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for warrant number AP 2020-11. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Motion to approve warrant number APW 2020-8, dated November 15th, 2019, in the amount of $279,860.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for APW 2020-8. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Okay. We also have gifts and donations. So,
Okay, donation from the Cinnamon Scholarship Account. Be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee accept a donation of $1,000 to the Cinnamon Scholarship Account from the Fidelity Charitable Fund from Ann and Jeff Simony, as recommended by the district treasurer.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Okay, this one is a donation for the robotics STEM program. Be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee accept a donation of $2,000 to the robotics STEM program from General Dynamics as recommended by the district treasurer.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Communication, the report of the chair. We still have a Town of Washington School Committee vacancy. There's got to be somebody in Washington. This has been going on so long. Really, I don't know anybody in the Town of Washington, but if you could put your brains together and see if you know anybody from anywhere who might be able to join us, that would be great. Regional agreement.
I'll speak to that. As most of us recall, in July, we passed a resolution that mandated the use of the town-by-town way of voting for indebtedness. And there were a number of problems with that we and others see. One of them is that it allows a single town to veto any capital project that we have. So even if it's a roof at Beckett, Washington, Dalton could veto it if they choose to. And the small towns, that's really very few people that can veto one of our projects. The other thing is that the language that is mandated in that resolution kind of conflicts with Massachusetts general law, so it invites litigation. In fact, we've seen litigation in Dennis Yarmouth, and it's still holding up their project. They're a year late and $250,000 in the hole as a result of that. So Rich Peters and I met with Vivian Mason from Hinsdale and a couple of other town officials to see if we could come up with some language that honored the small towns, but also put some protections against litigation and some of the other problems with it. And that discussion went very, very well. We had progress. We had about 3 approaches that we thought would work, and were pretty much satisfactory to the people that were there. So both Rich and I think the others there were very happy with the result. So I gave it to our attorney and said, this is what we're thinking, how are we doing? And he said, I'm not sure that's going to fly. And he sent it on to Desi, who has to approve any of these changes. And the initial reaction was, no, it's not going to fly. But what they have done is they have forwarded it to Desi Legal, and they are going to look at those 3 proposals that we had, as well as the original one, to see if it's legal. And I don't know when that's going to come down. It's in legal and it could take a while. But I hope it comes soon. It would be nice that it comes soon. The other outcome that came from that discussion with Vivian that wasn't so positive is that I was hoping that we could deal with the 7-town advisory committee that has all representatives from 7 towns and talk to them together. But no, the language of the resolution says we'll meet with the select boards. So she insists on doing that. So probably eventually we will have to do that. The conclusion is that probably a compromise is not in the cards. So what we have done is we have put together the paperwork for the school committee to vote for an amendment to the regional agreement, and that will be actually the language that Dennis Yarmouth uses. Now that's a lengthy document because you have to have what it is now compared with where it goes to. And the indebtedness issue is only a couple of lines. That's fairly straightforward. But Desi previously had asked for 6 changes, or a number of changes. We put 6 of them in there. And they can be, they're trivial, they're non-controversial, but they take up a lot of paper. There were 2 others that if townsfolk saw them, they would say, you don't know what you're talking about. So things like there are 8 members of the school committee from Dalton, and in fact, there are 7. The accounts are incorrect in our current regional agreement, so we fixed that. So it's a lengthy document. It'll be a motion that will come before this school committee, and that will be a motion to amend the regional agreement. So that's where we are right now. So that was forwarded to Desi and said, Desi, do you like this? Will it pass? We hope they say yes, but we're not holding our breath. So where we go from here is that the amendment has actually been written, it's been forwarded to Desi, contains all of those things that I mentioned. Eventually, we'll have to meet with the 7 select boards. Eventually, we will have to vote here in the school committee to forward that on to the towns. And incidentally, if you read the regional agreement, it takes 12 of us to vote affirmatively to pass that amendment. And then ultimately, it goes to the annual town meetings in May and June. So that's where we are. I'll keep giving you updates. I hope we have something from Desi sometime soon. Probably we'll put the amendment in the school committee packet so that you can see what it is and you have to be familiar with it. This whole thing is, the indebtedness issue is not all that big an issue. However, it does speak to the credibility of the school committee, so it's important from that standpoint. You know, have we done our homework? Does it look right? Are we presenting it properly? And we're tested on that every single spring. So we want, and the attorney agrees with me, we want to do a good job on this. We can't be casual about it because we don't believe in it or because it doesn't amount to a lot. So we are spending quite a bit of time on it. So that's where we are.
Okay, so I know that it needs to be voted on at the town meetings that take place in May, but does it have to be on the warrant
Yes.
by March?
That's correct. It has to be on the warrant for those town meetings, and the first of those is in March.
So we really have a time constraint.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the conferences I went to at the convention this past week was about regional agreements, and so I'm giving you a whole lot of credit, two of you, for working so hard on this, because what they suggested was a regional agreement amendment committee, RAAC, and they talked about how you have to hire a group of people, and they come and they work with the district to create this regional agreement that will pass the DESI muster. So it's just something to keep in the back of our brains that we might need to do this at some point. Anyway, there's a lot of information about that workshop. It's a perfect segue if nobody has any questions of Mr. Locatell about the regional agreement.
One question, can I just ask for clarification? So the 7 town advisory, what you're saying is that even if members of select boards from the 7 towns were present, that can't move this forward?
That's what Vivian said when we met with her. And this is a Hinsdale-Vivian mandate. And she said no, that's not an acceptable substitute to her. And she had, these are personal, these are individuals with their own access to ground. And she had reasons more than just the regional agreement that she wanted that to happen.
So, if I understand correctly, Vivian Mason is suggesting that for this to move forward, we would have to have 7 individual meetings.
That's correct. Well, that's what our motion said too. The July motion said that. July resolution.
Which could extend the time frame
Right.
because some towns, select boards meet every 2 weeks, some every, okay. Just an observation.
I mean,
A challenge.
It's a very hard standard to meet.
you know,
Sorry, what did you say?
each
It's a very
town
hard
is different.
standard to meet.
These are personal whims, and they don't apply to every person in every select board.
And that's probably why a regional agreement amendment committee might be helpful, because it's taking the onus off of us to make these changes. But I'm not sure. That's just something to think about.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Taylor?
If Rich, if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, you did a nice job.
So if this,
Take it
I just will add one other thing. Washington was also represented there. Wasn't just in
And that Washington person doesn't want to be on our school committee? Okay.
so if
Yeah.
this doesn't get on the ballots for the town meetings this year, does it just carry over to the following year and we just keep working on it? 'Cause that's basically
The
it.
motion we passed, the resolution we passed in July said it would be on the 2020
Right.
annual town meetings. So and I think the school committee ought to try our very best to get it on that ballot, that town meeting.
That is still in Desi Legal, you said, Desi? Or, so what if Desi Legal finds some,
That would be wonderful.
yeah,
I'm hoping for that to happen. That would be great.
take the onus off of us.
Absolutely.
The lawyer said.
Okay. Thank you. Oh,
Was there talk about an extension at all?
No.
I would say that's something that maybe we could bring off if they
Well,
came back or we're having trouble getting to the time to talk about it.
Yeah, it's not clear we're in time trouble at this point. And the sooner we can put this to bed, the better. It's kind of hanging over our heads.
okay. We'll move on to the joint conference that we attended in Cape this week. And Mr. Peters and I were able to go, and Lori was there too, and it was wonderful being able to have dialogues outside of here. And I highly recommend the conference. I've been to many in my 40 years as an educator, and I can clearly say that this one ranks amongst the top 5. And I went to workshops, and I took away something from each workshop, so that speaks volumes, I think. Really high quality. I'll just give you a brief rundown on some of the ones that I went to. I won't go into much depth, but the first one was Strong Communities, Strong Public Schools. And they talked there about the changing demographics, which is something we brought up at our meeting today in Equity and Diversity. The numbers of kids who are in poverty, 1 out of 5 kids are in poverty, and 2.7 million grandparents are raising their grandchildren. So that's very different than what we remembered from our time. Childhood trauma, we talked about that tonight too at our previous meeting. And they also talked about some positive alternatives to school suspension, because we all know that suspension sometimes is just a day off for a kid without parental supervision, and it's not very effective. So there are other things that we can do within the school to carry out discipline in a more productive way. They talked about some next steps for success and mentoring programs, and they described one that was going on in the schools that they were working in, where teachers work with at-risk kids before and after school. They meet with them for lunch sometimes, but they're the anchor person that they can go to in case they need to touch base with someone during the course of the day. And that's oftentimes a valuable thing. They had an 8th grade block for organization and support, because they found that 8th graders tend to need some help in that area, probably 6th and 7th too, but outreach counselors were available, and parent coffee hours, 1 time per term, providing information and resources. So those are my takeaways. And then leading in changing times, and trust and communication being so critical for school committee and superintendents. And they talked about true institutional change takes 5 to 10 years. And according to Mike Fuller, who's a big name in education. The school committee responsibilities are to recruit, hire, and direct superintendent, determine district policies, and formulate budget and priorities. So one school committee said that they, before each committee meeting begins, they review those three things that's their job. Because apparently sometimes school committees can get away from being focused on what their real true responsibilities are. I don't think we have that issue here. I think we're pretty focused, we know what we're doing. The superintendent's responsibilities are to manage the system, implement school committee policy, adhere to state regulations, and they added a fourth one, and I think Lori does a great job of that, is advocating and cheerleading for the school district. I mean, it's really an important job that she sends out that message to all the publics that we're doing a good job. Another workshop I went to was on educational collaboratives. We don't have any in the Berkshire County, but collaboratives are systems that offer specialized programs for kids. So suppose we needed a teacher of the hearing or visually impaired. That's not something that we can easily find in our area, so you go to one of these collaboratives and they provide those resources for you. In New York, it was like a BOCES program. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was Board of Cooperative Educational Services. And they were your group that you went to for specialized programming for kids, for special services, even for professional development. But again, we don't have anything like that here in the Berkshires. Then I went to amending regional agreements, and the consultant was there. And of course, I'm sure he wanted some business. And so he was promoting his service. But they talk about the original agreement being a comprehensive document that's easy to understand. It defines authority of the district and the member towns to educate the students. It outlines commitments of member towns and district, and it unifies elementary grades so that the curriculum that we have at Beckett, Washington is the same as it is at Kittredge, the same at Craneville. So if we haven't amended our regional agreement in the past 7 years, it really needs to be updated, they said, because there have been so many changes. So they talked about the process to amend, form a committee. Oh, if the original agreement predates 1993, it should be updated. They talked about the composition of the RAAC, and then it has to be placed on the warrant, and the whole process that we know that has to happen for us. And with, of course, DESE and the commissioner approving. Another one I went to was about recruiting a diversified educational workforce in Massachusetts. It seems to be a universal problem that there's not a large pool of people of diversity, but they talked about ways in which we could possibly have local hiring fairs, we could have recruitment projects, and recruitment trips to southern colleges and universities that are traditionally black and metropolitan areas, and developing from within, which is something we talked about before. We really need to grow our own, and maybe the pool of people who are paraprofessionals or teachers who know other people, that might be a way in which to recruit. Even high school students, if you see that they're on the track for education, really help them decide that Central Berkshire is a great place to work. Another person suggested eliminating the MTEL, which is the test that teachers have to take. And they recommended a book by Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching, and we talked about that at our meeting tonight too. I'm going to stop there because I could go on forever, but if anybody's interested in my notes, I have them. Do you want to add anything from your workshops?
Well, I'll just build on what you just said, and this is my second time going there, and school committee members, I highly recommend going. There's just so much to learn, and it's very top quality. The speakers are amazing. And one of the speakers there was a man named Derek Gay, and he gave an incredible talk on diversity and how he has really interesting insights on diversity, and I recommend you go to his TED Talks, and you can also go to his website and download some of his talks, but he was just totally enlightening on the word diversity. And you had just mentioned diversity. We are a very diverse group here right now, right? There's genders, there's maybe, religion, there's all sorts of diversity. It's not just skin colors. So it was really interesting, his talk, and I definitely recommend it. So that was kind of interesting. But they just had tremendous people. I mean, these are internationally. Norm Ornstein, I don't know if any of you know Norm Ornstein, author and political. He came and spoke as well for one of the general sessions, and just tremendous stuff. Just a couple things that from the ones I went to that I think I'd like to share very briefly. I went to several on finance. I'm just going to summarize real quick, but the most important one was with Tracy Novick from MASC, and she gave a presentation on, it was called 70 Minutes on Chapter 70, which I don't know if, I've been on the finance committee now, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and it's still just fuzzy to me. And she gave this incredible presentation on 70/70, very simple, easy to understand, it was great. I asked her, hey, I'd really love you to come, and she said she could come and give the talk to us, and she was amazing. So I'm going to try and set that up, get her down here. I don't know whether we go to it would be too long for at a committee meeting, but certainly to bring her in and to the finance committee and to anybody else who's interested, just to see that presentation, because it was really enlightening. And there were several things that we really need to get onto that I took notes on that I need to get with our new business manager to make sure that we're on board with this, because the new law that just passed, they're mandating a 59% funding from local, 41% from state. It's kind of been unwritten, it's been that way for a long time, but they're carving it in stone now. And if you're below that curve, you're going to get hurt. If you're above that curve, you're probably okay, but your towns might say, hey, I'm only going to give you 41%, and they might cut back. So we have to really take a look at what our loading is from towns and make sure we're okay there. I think we're probably above it and we're probably okay, but that's something that we need to really get into and understand, because it might impact us in that respect. So the other one that I thought was interesting that I went to was DRA was there. DRA is our architectural firm, and they gave a talk on new schools and new high schools. And Stoughton and Middlefield were there, and they both, Stoughton just moved into their new school and this year in September, and Middlefield is going to move in next year. So they're in two different phases of where we are in our school. And they gave a talk, and they talked about how they prepared for it, because both of these schools are going into just what we're doing, project-based learning, pods, that sort of thing. And they said that Stoughton had spent 5 years preparing, getting themselves set up for the PBL model, and they went to, 5 years ago they started going to a block model, and I'm not an educator, it means nothing to me, but they said that they went to a block model, it's like 70 or 80 minutes, and it forced them to get away from the lectures in lecture program, and they felt very ready for that. And Middlefield didn't do that, but they said they started like a year ago doing blocks. So they might be in the situation we were in, that we're in right now. I really don't know. But there was a couple other things that come out of that. The thing they said it wasn't all peaches and cream, coming out of this, going into the new school. The two biggest things that Stoughton said that happened that they weren't really prepared for was, and I'm going to bring this up to the school committee, the school building committee as well, is they weren't prepared for the protocols, like the lunch details and, free breaks and gym, all the different things that happen, like getting to the school bus and getting out, all those little protocols. It's a whole new process and procedures, and, they really weren't prepared. The first day was a little bit chaotic, and it took them a while to get going on those protocols. That was the other thing. And the other big one was the teachers losing their spaces, and they haven't really come to grips with that yet. Stoughton had said that was their biggest challenge right now that they're dealing with. And one of the things that came out of that also, and this is going down that path, was one of the schools, they had this beautiful mural that they to decorate the walls of the new school in Stoughton, that the students, and some of the students and the art class and the teachers, they kind of put together this Stoughton historical wall mural that they, printed and put on the wall as part of the wall decorations. And one of the things I thought of, and I just thought of this afterwards, I don't know if any of you have ever been in Mr. Bradshaw's room, but it's an amazing, my son called it the temple. It's a temple, and it's just amazing. You go in there, the walls are, 40 years of teaching history on those walls. And I thought, boy, maybe that's a way you could translate this teacher culture piece by making a mural out of that. Get with the teacher, get a mural out of that, and bring that mural and put it on some of the walls, empty spaces, to carry that culture forward. I don't know, it's an idea I threw out there. I don't know what it would cost or whatever, but I thought that might be one way to kind of soften the blow of losing that. Because when I talked to my son about it, he's like, you can't have a school without Mr. Bradshaw's classroom. It just doesn't work. Of course, he's from the old corner. So anyways, that was it. I thought that was interesting. I thought maybe that would be a way to help move the culture forward. And I'm going to bring that up also to DRA and the school building committee as well. So, yeah, see if I have some other notes. I just went to a meeting on busing that I thought was interesting. And again, I'm going to get with Greg and some of that stuff. And that's about it.
Thank you. It really was a great conference.
Yes.
Think about it for next year because there's a lot of stuff for new members also.
Yes.
Okay. Now up to subcommittee reports and recommendations. Curriculum, we met last night and they're blending together. And we had a great presentation by Sean Therian on science, and Bonnie's going to share a little bit with us.
Thank you. So, as Betty correctly said, we had a presentation from John Ferry, who was very detailed about the science programs in each of the levels of schools. He talked about the FOSS kits in the K-5 schools and indicated that there were kits in each school. At one point, he carried these boxes from school to school, and the FOSS kits include some interactive insects and worms, and so I can imagine him trying to stuff it all back into his car. But the information he gave us was that the kids really enjoy it. They get really excited about the hands-on science projects. This is a very project-based learning. There is coaching available to the teachers by Patty Roby. The FOSS science project is not used in any other school in Berkshire County. It is used in the Pioneer Valley. But we asked how the students liked it, and the feedback was that the kids really, really enjoy it. They get very excited, and so that was very nice to hear. In the middle school, we utilize iScience, which is a more traditional based science program. There are virtual labs and online assessment, and it's really tailored to meet the standards for the schools. Coaching is done by John Bosworth, who has a science background. And in the high schools, we learned about the various disciplines that are taught: engineering 1 and 2, CAD, 3D printing, auto lab, construction technology. And what was interesting with the technology, the construction technology, is that the district has a subscription to the software, so they get updates. As opposed to buying the software, they have a subscription, so they get automatic updates with new information. And there's a new teacher that has a construction background, so when they move into the new school, they'll be able to transition with some new science projects along that line. And we also talked about the availability of students in all levels of learning to be able to access different curriculum, and there's no restrictions, so everything is open to every student, which I thought was
Including AP classes.
yes, and very inclusive. So, while the goal is for people to pass the AP classes, What was clear was that they in no way would they restrict someone who wanted to pursue AP classes, even if they weren't able to pass the class. It was more about being more inclusive and allowing everyone to participate. So that was very good. Our next meeting will be on January 23rd at 6 p.m. at Mcas, and we will have a presentation on instructional coaching.
Instructional rounds.
Thank you. And that, again, will be presented, I believe, by Sean.
And probably Leslie and Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Bonnie? Anything, any of the members from curriculum want to add to that? She did a pretty comprehensive job. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Okay, finance.
We have not met, and the next meeting is December 10th at 5:30 in the central office.
And policy.
We haven't met. I'm hoping to nail down a few dates to possibly meet by the end of tonight. I know we have to discuss adding the code of conduct for school committee members. We've done that, and I believe we're going to be working on superintendent evaluation. School committee.
Yours.
Sorry.
Your turn.
Thank you. Okay, personnel.
I would like to go into executive session sometime, and can wait toward the end of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Safety and wellness. Yeah, okay. And Wacona Building Project. Any report, any updates?
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been a school building committee meeting in that time period, but what we have is, I have been getting the school building committee, not the school building committee, but the subgroup has been meeting, Skanska has been meeting with construction folks every other week, and they've had some updates that they shared with us on that, and I'll share that with you guys, so if I can find it. Yeah. So today, actually, the 60% construction drawings were submitted today. The ARA was busy getting those done, so that was submitted today. And we have to get the submission of the 60% documents were due by December 19th, so they're going to review them and get them back. One of the things that I think is of interest locally is the file sub-bids. Skanska is working with Central Berkshire to issue the file sub-bid pre-qualification requests. These are for subcontractors, with the trades, like the plumbing, elevator, waterproofing, HVAC, electrical, masonry. And honestly, Skanska is reaching out to Berkshire contractors to make them aware that these RFQs are out there. But if you know somebody who's in those industries, you might want to let them know that, hey, these RFQs are coming on the school project if you have somebody you know that might be interested in, bidding on some of this work. So that's happening. The utility relocations, they were supposed to do this, they buried the utilities, moved the utilities, but they were supposed to do a transformer shift, and the weather, or I don't know what happened, but Eversource did not pull it off, so it's going to happen in the spring. I don't think it's a big problem. It's really they're upgrading the transformer to a much larger transformer that'll work for both the construction project and the new school when it's done. So it's not critical that it's not done now. It'll be fine in the spring to get that done. Working on getting the permitting, and yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? All right. We're ready for you. All right, superintendent's
Okay.
report and recommendations.
All right. I will, just because the bulk of the report is the Mcas presentation that Leslie and I will do. But I did include class size. I believe I may be a little bit late to the party because this conversation did happen at the curriculum subcommittee in more depth at the time that it should have in September, because now we are well into November and things are going well in this aspect. There are a couple classrooms that I know Leslie talked to you about. We are watching closely for their size, specifically a grade 2 at Kittredge and a grade 2 at Craneville. So we have allocated additional support services into those classrooms to lower the ratio. Even though the overall class size is larger, there is additional staffing in those rooms. I did just check with Leslie again to see if she had any concerns since the conversation you last had, and she has not. But we are looking at those closely. We'll continue to look at those closely as school choice requests come in for next year. It's a small number of additional students in grade 2 at Craneville, but that small number did push one of the classes to a size that I would consider one worthy of being closely watched, which it is. So I believe this conversation has happened fairly in-depth. I do want you to have it though, and just be careful looking at some of the secondary class sizes, because you may say that doesn't make sense. Some of those are PE classes, some of those are intervention-based classes. Those are not core content classes. When you see classes that are either in the 40s, or you see classes that are in the singletons. So just being aware of that. To make sure that that's something that people use to interpret that data. But if you do have any specific questions and you look closer at it and you want to further explore those with Leslie or I, we're happy to do so. But again, the secondary doesn't have any that are necessarily catching my attention right now for concerns, but I do know that you had conversations with Leslie, rightfully so, about 2 fairly large grade 2 class sizes that we do have in Kittredge and Craneville, and our approach has been that really that quality tier 1 teacher in the classroom is key. So keeping that teacher in the classroom with the students as opposed to looking for a teacher in September or October is not an ideal time, but offsetting the size with additional resources, which have been allocated in both those classrooms, Kittredge and Craneville. If that makes sense.
Can I just?
Yes, please do.
I just wanted to say I've encouraged Superintendent Castle not to discuss her goals tonight, just because she's just returned and she could benefit from a little bit more time before she presents her goals. So that'll happen in a meeting in the future.
And I'm very grateful for that, because one of the things I'm exceptionally grateful for is that I knew people would keep the ship afloat, but they did not keep just the ship afloat in my absence. It kept moving quite well in the right direction. So I do need to kind of get fully up to speed to write goals that are really reflective of what our current needs are. And I think that some of them exist in this data, and some of them also will exist in the school improvement plans that you see. So I will get those to you for the December meeting, but I want them to be actually reflective of where we're at in November, not where I was at when I was last year before I left. So this is actually, Barbara gave an excellent segue into this, because my role, or the role that I like to play, we sometimes do have to make sure we're transparent about things that are not so worthy of cheerleading, is to advocate and cheerlead, because I absolutely do believe that we have a phenomenal district with phenomenal educators in all roles and phenomenal families. And this data here tonight is really an opportunity to advocate and cheerlead. And that has not always necessarily been the story that we can say, while also being transparent about some of our significant challenges that showed up in our data last year. I was kidding with Leslie a little bit earlier, because I am going to defer largely to Leslie to do this presentation, as I do think is appropriate, given the amount of work that she has not only done on putting this in a presentation format for you, but leading the work that led to the numbers that you will see here. But I was kidding with her a bit, because in my career, this would be the most positive Mcas presentation that I would have had the opportunity to do. So I'm going to, there's been some other years I would graciously pass the baton to Leslie to do it. It did not. But this year I am certainly doing it, I think, in a positive way. We did see growth. There are 2 scores that Leslie will talk to you about, and she really wants you to understand them. The score that's called the Criterion reference score, which is the score that the state is giving the most weight and the most attention to at this point, because like anything, we want people to really look at themselves and where they've gone. Grow against your own goals. And so the Criterion reference score is how are we doing in comparison to where we were last year. All 5 schools' Criterion reference scores improved. The second score is your norm reference score. Where are you in relation to the rest of the state, which is relevant for us and something we want to be aware of. And all 5 schools improved. We do want to spend a little bit more time, obviously, giving an immense amount of credit to the Mcas staff, and especially the Mcas staff that worked incredibly hard last year under the leadership of Principal White, and really saw themselves make such significant growth and such significant gains that in one short year they moved themselves out of turnaround, which is a pretty incredible feat. Which was not achieved without a lot of significant effort and openness to really look at the areas that needed to improve and acknowledge them, and be honest about going after work that had to be done, and really continuing a laser focus even when that work was very hard. So we're going to go over that. Leslie again will do the bulk of it. I will add a few things, but I will be absolutely honest. When we went through this afternoon, it's the first time that I've really been able to dialogue with Leslie uninterrupted for a long period of time just about this. We were excited, so it was really kind of saying, wait a minute, look at that, 4 out of 4, look at that, 6 out of 8, look at that, all 5 schools are going in the right direction where they have been striving to get to. We absolutely, in this presentation, have grows, and we absolutely want to acknowledge and highlight those as well, but we are very proud of the fact that the overall pattern for us is very strong.
So the other thing I guess I just want to add to what Lori is saying is although we are the voice of this presentation and we are the voice of these results, so much hard work is done every day by our administrators and our CBRSD educators, and we have such strong administrators and educators in this district, and they work every day and they make decisions that really put students at the forefront. So I'm very grateful. We're very grateful for that, and we're also very grateful for just the work that like I said, the work that happens on a daily basis. I did keep in this presentation a little bit of the history because I think it's important to understand the history, and I think it's also important to understand what these assessments will look like in 2020. So it really spans a range going back from 1998, where all assessments were referred to as the legacy Mcas, and they were all paper-based, all the way to this upcoming spring in 2020. And all assessments in 2020 will be the Mcas Next Generation in ELA and math and science. In between here, as you probably already know, we did experiment a little bit with an assessment called PARC, and then Massachusetts segued into an assessment that was similar to PARC, but they felt like it was a more rigorous assessment. It was called the Mcas Next Generation. This Mcas Next Generation was actually scaffolded in, so that last year, the Next Generation Mcas was given 3 through 10 computer-based. It was the last year, this past spring in 2019, that was the first year that the high school experienced the Next Generation Mcas in ELA and math. They still had the legacy assessment in science. In grades 3 through 8, they had Next Generation in ELA, math, and science. But just keep in mind again, the last transition will be in 2020, where all assessments will be computer-based and all assessments will be Next Generation. This is a little bit of information around accountability because, as you know, accountability data from the state can be a little bit overwhelming, and there have been some changes since last year. What has not changed is the bulk of the accountability data is broken into 2 categories: schools that are requiring assistance and schools that are not requiring assistance. What has changed is on this side, there are more categories. So it's kind of difficult if you were in last year, on this side, schools not requiring assistance, it's kind of hard to compare because, like I said, there are more categories. But one thing that we are very proud of is that none of our schools this year are requiring assistance. Also to add, like what you may be thinking is how do you get into one of these categories? Like what does this look like? Your Criterion reference score determines which category you're in on this side. Your norm score determines if you're on this side. So just a little bit of background, I think Lori already sort of said this, your Criterion reference score is us against ourselves. So the state basically sets targets for us. And depending on how well we meet those targets, we get points. And those points determine a percentage. This side, a norm score, is where all of the standardized scores, which are called scaled scores, those are averaged, and then we're ranked compared to the rest of the state. So if you are in the bottom 10%, you're put in this side. This is just basically some different ways that we look at our information and our data. When you say the word achievement data, that basically means scaled scores. Growth data, how well are we growing? The state determines 50 as adequate growth. Additional indicators that we've talked about before, chronic absenteeism, the percentage of 11th and 12th graders completing advanced coursework, which is primarily determined by AP coursework. Graduation rates. So graduation is measured by four-year graduation, and we also have some students that graduate beyond 4 years, which is 4+. Just also, again, I think this is something that I just reiterated, we get points. So for meeting these targets, just to reiterate, if we exceed our targets, we get 4 points. If we meet our targets, we get 3 points. If we've improved but we are below target, we get 2 points. If there's no change, we get 1 point. If we're below target, we get 0. If you're wondering how the state determines our targets, what they do is they take all the schools in the state of Massachusetts, and you are put into a quartile. So there are 4 quartiles. And of those quartiles, school improvers, so schools that are making progress, are pulled out of those quartiles, and then averages are taken on how well they make progress, on how much those students are growing. And then there's an average. So just so you have like some idea of what that might look like, a target might be from last year to this year, we want you to go up 1.5 points in your scaled score, or maybe we want you to go up 3 points, but it's about in that range. It's anywhere from 1.5 to 3. We don't know what those targets are going to be for this upcoming year. We probably won't know until about, say, January or February.
Tell me again what the target scores are used for. What are those points used for?
So those points are used to determine our Criterion reference score.
And that's on that previous slide.
I'm going to go through it again, so you'll see more. You'll see points. I'll show you lots of points in a minute. So you can earn anywhere from, say, 0 to 4 points. So if you, for example, have an average scaled score of 500, and your target is 1.5, and you have scored 501.5, you get a 3 for meeting your target. If you're above that, you would get awarded 4 points for moving above your target. I hope that makes sense.
And your Criterion reference score would be essentially your points you scored this year compared to last year.
Yeah. This I just put in here for reference because these are the 3 big terms that the state uses to measure our accountability. You'll see this word progress toward improvement targets. Again, this is our Criterion reference score, and this is what Lori was referring to. The state really considers this to be the most important score. This is basically how they determine our improvement trajectory. How are we growing against ourselves? If we continue to grow at a rate that the state has set for us, most likely our norm score will improve. So this is really the most important score. The accountability score is a norm score. So basically the scaled scores are averaged and they're ranked around the state, and we're given a score depending on where we fall in relation to the rest of the state. This is not our data, this is state data. So I just wanted you to have some idea of statewide data, and usually in general, the state will say to us, we can't really look at a pattern until we've had 2 to 3 years of data. So right now, for several of our assessments, we can say we've had 3 years of data. So this is the scaled score change from 2017 to 2019. But again, this is statewide, this is not our data. There is a chart that compares our scaled scores to the state scores. But just to give you some idea of what the state is looking at in terms of our growth across the state in grades 3 through 10, ELA. In this one, I'm sorry, this one is just ELA.
So what's the minimum and the maximum of, it looks like the average is around 500. What's the minimum and maximum you can have?
I would have to look that up for you.
How sensitive is this? Should I be alarmed at 1 point, or should I be alarmed at 100 points?
It's
530 is the highest.
What's
530 is the highest.
530, okay.
And no, it's not 0. It's no, it's 4 something.
I'll find the lowest for you. I don't know. I'm gonna have to look that up.
It's 4.
We don't like to focus on that number, but we will get that for you.
Otherwise, it's meaningless, I think.
Right. So in the bands, 500 is where it starts to be meeting expectations, the kids' scores. And so when you average them, you're taking in some kids that may have failed and got 4 something and 5, but it's no more than 100-point difference between the lowest score and the top score.
I thought it was 420, that's why, okay.
420 maybe, right?
That's what I thought it was. So it's about, that's the band. Again, but when you're looking at it, you're thinking about 500 is where you're at meeting expectations. The average state score right now in grade 7 and grade 8 is still slightly below that. And has tracked that for a while now. But they see it going in the right direction in 8, but not in 7. But the big thing the commissioner kept emphasizing is we were discouraged from using this chart until this year because of the lack of 3 years of data. But now you do see there's some pretty rapid growth in grade 3.
And I think the importance for us, or how we use this information, is looking at our averages and how we compare to the state. Because one of the goals that we had, and we have still in our school improvement plans, are to be as close to the state average as possible. So that's how we're using this information primarily. So this is why this is valuable, because we know our scaled scores, we know our average scaled scores. The principals know their average scaled scores as a school and as a grade, and they want to know where they stand in comparison to the state. And are they making the same kinds of gains as the state? This is the same for math. Again, this information for us is most valuable when we compare it to our own scores and our own progress. Science is a little bit different because last year, there's only 1 year's worth of data in science. And last year was the very first year that our students took the Science Next Generation Assessment. So there's only 1 year's worth of data. So this would be the scaled score for science, but like I said, there's only 1 year's worth of data for grade 5 and grade 8. In grade 10, they continue to take the legacy assessment. So the data is reported a little bit differently, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Right here, this is a comparison of our scores district-wide in comparison to the state in terms of scaled scores. Now, one thing I think is important to keep in mind is that this is an average. There are classes and there are schools across our district that are actually above the state average that might be slightly below that are at the state average, but this is our average. This is not really, this may not tell, this data right here isn't going to tell you necessarily how a third grade class at Beckett, Washington is performing. This is an average across the district.
And this information right here feeds into the norm reference score that you will see as one of two scores for each school. So a score that has a norm reference score above 50 is likely overall having scaled scores here above the state average. A school that's slightly below, maybe slightly below. But this does not feed into the score, the criterion reference score. This is our norm reference score of
This
how
is
we
our norm.
compare to the state. So if you look and you're saying, well, which schools are likely more above and where are they at, you'll see that when you look at the norm reference score as to how close they are overall to the state.
So for example, if you were to look at grade 4, you can see that grade 4 is about at the state average.
That would be overall in all three
Right.
elementaries. You'll see their individual norm reference scores when we talk individually.
All this data, just also so you know, all of this data, even by school, is public information. So if you ever have any questions about that, email me and I can show you exactly where to find it. Because this is still, although more detailed, this is still a summary of district level data. This is grade 6, 7, 8, and grade 10. Again, science, which is reported as a CPI and not as a scaled score, and that's because it was the legacy assessment. Science, you can see, is above the state average, but the numbers look a little bit different. This, if you're wondering, and I'm going to show you what our criterion reference score is and what our norm reference scores are for each of the buildings, and their highlights for us. These are improvements for us. We are getting closer to the state average. This is growth for us, but you're going to see that reflected more, less so in these scores, more so in our criterion reference score, and more so in our norm score. We also, as a district, get a score, but the difference between district level data and school level data is that the district only receives one score. The district doesn't receive a norm score. It's not, so we only receive as a district a criterion reference score. So as a district, all students, non-high schools, which is grades 3 through 8, if you were to look at, so ELA, we could have earned a total of 4 points. We earned 4 points out of 4. For our lowest performing students, we earned 3 points out of 4. This is data we're really proud of. Overall, we earned 9 points out of 12. This right here, this percentage, 67.5, is how much this 9 counts for us. This is how our criterion reference score is determined. This year as a district, our criterion reference score is 67%. Last year, our criterion reference score as a district was 23%. So we've grown as a district against ourselves and meeting our own targets. We've grown from 23% to 67%.
This also gives us a much more focused roadmap of where our grows are, because they're much more specific now, as opposed to having so many that you're trying to kind of navigate in a lot of different areas of improvement. We have some pretty targeted areas we can focus in on, because we earned the majority of our points, especially at the elementary level. I am sorry, Debbie. I've been complimenting you all day long. Had the state here.
We couldn't.
I've been complimenting you all day long. Just assume everything in this good for the middle school.
So I'll start with Craneville. If you look at Craneville, what you're going to see you're going to see 2 scores. This is the criterion reference score, and this is the norm score. This is how well, another way of thinking about this, it's simplistic and it's not totally accurate, but it is one way to think about it, is how well we're doing toward meeting our own targets. So if we have a 72%, we're basically, you can think of it as meeting 72% of our targets. It isn't quite that simple, but it's close. Now, in reality, Craneville's Criterion reference score last year was 67. This year, it's 76. The reason it says 72 is because the 67 counts for 40% and the 76 counts for 60%, and that equals 72% for us this year, which means if you think back to that very first chart, that counts as substantial progress toward making our targets. When they took the scaled scores at Craneville and averaged them and compared them to the rest of the state, we increased regarding our norm score, we increased from 44 last year to 48 this year.
That's
in
the
our state
whole
rank.
message too. We really want to make sure we're looking at a really high norm reference score and a low criterion reference indicates that you're going to go in the wrong direction. It's that exact example we talked about last year with Kittredge School. If this is happening, this will come. If this is happening, this will come. And you'll see Kittredge's score has continued to grow quite a bit. And that was the path we saw them to be on last year, even though you saw that their accountability percentile was still lower, given that their criterion reference score was so strong. That happened this year for them. Debbie's going to want you to remember, when we get to the middle school slide, a point Leslie made, that the overall criterion reference score is an average of the 2 years.
And so is the norm reference.
And the norm
And
reference.
I talked to the department about that last week. So Craneville getting to 48 really means this year they were more like 52. They were above the state average. But they combined the two, so that 44 is still counting in their score.
It is, Craneville too now for 2 years has had some pretty consistently high criterion reference score where 50 is identified as growth. And they had a 67 1 year and a 70 something the next. So they've been consistently hitting some pretty high growth.
This chart really outlines how Craneville earned their criterion reference score, not their norm score. So this basically shows there are two categories toward earning your criterion reference score. There's one category for all students, which includes the lowest performing, but then the lowest performing group is pulled out. The lowest performing group includes all students in a variety of subgroups. So that's basically the lowest 25% of students in your building. So those students are identified as concerning because we want those students to grow. There's an emphasis on growing those students academically. And so this data really shows us how well we're doing with some of our lowest performing students. So you can see that in ELA, we earned at Craneville 4 points out of a total of 4 for all of our students. For our lowest performing students, we also earned 4 points out of 4. What that means is in both categories, they exceeded their targets. So a 4 means they exceeded their targets. So the state set targets for them, and they exceeded it. 3 would be meeting, 4 is exceeding. In math, all students received 2 points. That means they made progress toward their target. So they earned 2 points out of a total of 4. But for their lowest performing students, they actually exceeded their targets in math. We don't have that, no, I'm sorry. For all students, we did not earn points for science achievement. And what that was telling us, and a lot of information that we have looked at, is the transition from legacy to next generation in science means that because science includes standards from 3rd grade to 5th grade, one of the things we need to really keep an eye on is a really robust review unit in 5th grade. Because we feel like we are hitting the standards that students are learning, but there's a lot of information that they're held accountable for when they move into at the end of 5th grade. So that's something that we're working on with Sean and also with Patty Roby, the instructional coach. The other thing you'll see is growth. Again, if you look right here at growth, ELA, 4 points out of 4, exceeded our targets, met our targets in math, growth, met our target for lowest performing students exceeded our target. Chronic absenteeism at Craneville exceeded our targets for all students. An area for growth, so if you're thinking glows and grows, this is a glow, this is one of our growth areas at Craneville. And so this information is weighted in two ways, for all students and for lowest performing students, and this is their Criterion reference score. I think what's notable here is that we actually scored higher at Craneville and commendable for our lowest performing students. For Kittredge, Kittredge last year, their Criterion reference score was 70%. This year it was 90%. When both those scores are taken into account, their Criterion reference score is 82. Their accountability percentile increased from 33 to 42.
That's huge. And Kathy's not here tonight, and the work that they have done as a staff at Kittredge, and Kathy as a principal who spends time in the classroom, she's been really tirelessly working at that Criterion reference score, knowing that the other one will come, but being kind of aware that at times last year that 33 was not necessarily reflective of where they were headed, and being kind of patient around that, because that Criterion reference score is huge, and to see that now she's seeing the gains to be at 42 for her accountability is a significant shift from 2 years ago and even from last year.
And so this really shows Kittredge's information and how they received their Criterion reference score. Because they are a small school, and this is true for Beckett Washington, they do not have a lowest performing group identified. But in ELA, they earned 4 points out of 4. They exceeded their targets in ELA. They exceeded their targets in math. They don't have science achievement because the numbers are low. The lower, it's a small school. In growth, they met their target in ELA. They made progress toward their target in math. Chronic absenteeism, they met their target. So that gave them a Criterion reference score of 90%. So you can see, I think hopefully you can kind of see that the closer you get toward your total possible points. So if you see points earned in this category, if you see a 4 or a 3 as compared to 4 out of 4, 3 out of 4, your chances of a high Criterion reference score are good, because that means that you're meeting or exceeding your targets that the state has set. So Beckett Washington has also made substantial progress toward their targets. Last year, their Criterion reference score was 36. This year, their Criterion reference score was 67, which averages out to a 54. Their accountability percentile increased from 68 in 2018 to 71 in 2019. Again, this is really the information around how they met this, how they achieved their Criterion reference score. All students, they earned 4 out of 4 points toward meeting their ELA targets. This is an area for growth for them, for lowest performing students. In math, again, they exceeded their targets in math, so both ELA and math for all students, they exceeded their targets. They made progress toward their targets for their lowest performing students.
I just want to point out the attendance as well, because we did have one row at Craneville in lowest performing. However, they had very good score for all students, and at Kittredge, 4 out of 4 for all students, and now at Beckett Washington, they were able to get that in all students and lowest performing, and there was a lot of collaboration and sharing of ideas and resources in the district and seeking them from outside the district amongst our principals to achieve that at the elementary level. A lot of parent outreach, because especially in the small schools, one family with 3 children who are consistently absent can have a significant impact, so a lot of individual attention had to be given.
So Mcas, Mcas last year, their Criterion reference score was 8%. This year, their Criterion reference score is 77%. That's a big jump. That's a really big jump. Their accountability went from 10 to 17. Again, if we continue, which we are fully anticipating continuing based on full implementation of our turnaround plan this year, this kind of growth, which is very robust growth, this will improve. This is how Mcas earned their Criterion reference score of 77%. They exceeded their targets for all students in ELA and for their lowest performing students. They exceeded their targets in math for all students. They met their target for lowest performing students in math. In science, they made progress toward their target. In growth, they made progress toward their target in ELA. They met their target in growth for their lowest performing students. They met their target in math. For their lowest performing students around growth, they made progress toward their target. Chronic absenteeism, so these are GLOWs for them. An area for growth, if we're talking about GLOWs and CROWs, an area of growth, which they are aware of right now, is in chronic absenteeism, where they did not receive points. So this is an area that they are growing, or they know that they're currently working on for both all students and their lowest performing students.
You will next school committee meeting hear a real drill into these grows through the school improvement plans. So we figured kind of give you this to digest, and then you should be looking for those kinds of things when the school improvement plans are presented.
So Wacona, again, going back to this was the first year that Wacona as our high school has experienced the next generation assessment in both ELA and math, but they continue to take the legacy assessment in science. Their Criterion reference score was 21%. Their Criterion reference score this year was 46%. Their accountability percentile increased from 46 to 47 in 2019. And for all students in ELA, a GLOW for them. They met their targets. They received 3 out of 4 points. An area of concentration and growth for them is for lowest performing students in ELA. In math, they met their target. In math, they exceeded their target for their lowest performing students. They did not receive any points in science for all students or for lowest performing students. I will say what's interesting about science is they're still performing above the state. But we know that we need to think about those lowest performing students in science, that's an area that we talked about a little bit yesterday with the curriculum subcommittee that we're working on. This actually, chronic absenteeism, I believe for Wacona, is actually a GLOW because this is better than last year. So they're making some steady growth in chronic absenteeism. For lowest performing students in chronic absenteeism, they actually exceeded their targets. This is not our data. This is just the only reason I put this up here is for you to understand how transitioning from legacy to next generation for the high school, how it looks different for high schools across the state of Massachusetts. Last year in 2018, in all high schools across Massachusetts, 91% of the students were either proficient or advanced. This year, 48%, you can see 48 and 13 is very different from 40 and 51. This is 2019. And the reason, so it's a much more rigorous assessment. Part of the reason that this looks different is for us to look at our 10th graders that are right here and to say, how do we support them toward being successful beyond high school. So if there are students here, now I will say, which makes this a little bit confusing, and Erin and I and other teachers at Wacona have had this conversation, these students are still passing. What's interesting about this is that last year and this year, the same percentage of students actually passed the test. So you could be this year impartially meeting and still pass the test. But what this does for us is it gives us some information on how we can better support students as they're transitioning past Wacona. Anything else, Erin? This is primarily an Mcas report, but I did want to include some information about AP. This is just a little snapshot of our AP results. And as you know, and I know you've heard Erin talk about this multiple times, and we're firm believers that opening the doors to AP courses is the right thing to do for students. If they have the motivation and if they have the drive to be in these courses, we want these courses to be available to them. And they do benefit by being in the course. So this just kind of gives you a 4-year summary from 2016 to 2019. The total number of AP students, if you compare 2016 to 2019, has gone up. It does vary year to year. The number of exams has actually gone up. And just to keep in mind that oftentimes one student could actually take more than one exam. AP students with qualifying scores this year, you can see, I think we made some significant gains. And the percentage of AP students with qualifying scores also went up this year.
In Aaron's, in Mr. Ralph's school improvement plan for Wacona, there will be a more in-depth review of the actual scores. One of the reasons we did want to include this in the MCAS presentation as well is you did see in Aaron's quote-unquote report card that results in his Criterion reference score and his norm reference score. What the state of Massachusetts is concerned about in terms of accountability are the first 2 columns. And those actually directly play into the points he earns as to how much access is being given to our lowest performing students and overall students to access AP courses. So they're not concerned in the MCAS side of things about the second 2 pieces. We absolutely are. But these 2 numbers do actually impact the Criterion reference and norm reference scores that you saw, if that makes sense. But we'll look closer at AP as an overall set of numbers in December.
The last time we saw AP discussed, we did it by subject area, I guess, as I recall. And so I hope that that's how you do it. And it strikes me, I mean, that's apparently the state believes that is good to have AP courses, that's a higher level course and so forth. But that seems to fly in the face of UDL, as I picture the 2. And when you only succeed half the time, that just doesn't seem right. And so I'm not in favor of this at all. I'm very discouraged by this, and I thought there'd be a greater improvement. I think the last time we saw a presentation was like 2 years ago. And if we keep doing the same thing, and it looks like we are, something's wrong. We should be changing something to improve the scores. As I recall, what a 3, 4, 5 is a passing.
3, 4, and 5 are qualifying scores.
And that's what same criteria you used a couple of years ago, I guess. So it looks like, roughly half qualifies, and that's where we're stuck.
So we will dive in by subject area, but I think something else that might be helpful at some point, whether it's in the curriculum subcommittee or at this level, is for some of our AP course teachers to talk about how they universally design AP. And that UDL should be in the AP setting as much as it should be in any other setting, so that more students can have the firm goal in the AP course, but will be accessing through different options. And that a student who may have just accessed, who was capable of a 5 but accessing at a 3 level, can access there. And a student who is at a different access point can still access the firm content. But I think we could talk with some of our AP teachers about the shifts they've had to make and are continuing to have to make to continue to increase the outcomes as their population has changed. Because there have been, I think that has
Last
happened as
2
well.
years ago, we were dismal in one area, and I don't recall what it was.
Yeah.
And I think it was a new teacher or a teacher that hadn't undergone the training. And so I'll be anxious to see what it looks like.
And kind of, I guess, to speak to that a little bit, one of the things we do have, and we update every year, is we have an AP action plan. And one of the items on our AP action plan was for all AP teachers to go to this organization called Mcas Insight and attend a 2-day course on really updating themselves around strategies for teaching AP courses and being as absolutely current as they possibly can. And I think all of our AP teachers actually just,
Mcas Insight will train math, science, and English AP teachers. Nobody else, but our other AP teachers have gone to college board level training, but Mcas Insight, all of our...
gone to that, the college board thing?
All of them have been college board trained.
Okay.
The math, science, and English AP teachers also went to an additional 2-day content workshop this
All
fall.
of them that are eligible.
Yeah.
yes, went this past fall.
Yeah.
So that was part of our plan, that they would all attend.
I think it might be helpful if this data is out there to show our number of percentage of students with qualifying scores versus a state or a national average.
We have that information, yes, I agree.
Because
Yeah.
while it looks like, yeah, half of our kids are
Right.
getting qualifying scores, these
Right.
tests are very rigorous and the subject matters are very difficult. So
Yes, I agree.
it's not really fair to kind of say that, oh, we're not doing very well if only half of our kids are passing or getting
Right.
qualifying scores.
Right.
If maybe that's sort of the trend around the country.
We will include all of that. We'll include it breakdown by subject area, state and national averages, as well as a little bit of an overview of what Leslie has been talking about, is in what Mr. Locatelli has been talking about, is 2 years ago, there were some pretty significant concerns with some of the scores. So we developed an AP action plan, is what we call. It's an implementation plan with certain tasks and people responsible that we have been working towards completing so we can track closer what is working to improve the data. And we've made some structural changes as well from 2 years ago around even if a course is offered every day versus every other, that kind of thing. So we can review that as well.
Is it on the chart, is it around 50% that are getting qualifying scores? Because the other, it doesn't match up to the grid. The other ones are raw numbers, and that last one's a percentage.
It looks like over 50% of AP students with qualifying scores.
Yes,
Okay, only because it just...
Yeah, it's the labeling.
I wasn't sure. if it was-
yeah, yes, exactly.
Oh, no. Keep going. Mr. Peters.
General, like, district areas for focus. So this is the first year we have had alignment in our math instruction, kindergarten through 8th grade. All alignment in terms of programming. So all grades, K through 8, are using Eureka Math. So, but for professional development purposes, this is the first year that we are focusing K through 5 on the adoption of a new math program. So that is a focus for us this year. And in general, I feel like looking at our scale scores, we've identified our scale scores as not quite as strong as our ELA scores. So this is a focus area for this year, which we anticipated, and we made a commitment to this actually in the spring. Craneville is focusing this year on implementation of inclusive settings, as well as targeted intervention support for students with disabilities. Wacona and Nessicus will continue to closely monitor chronic absenteeism, and their strategies for doing that is increasing communication and support for families. Wacona is proceeding with full implementation of a coaching model, which has been available to the elementary and the middle school previously, but this year it's been extended to the high school, and full implementation of instructional rounds, which we'll be reporting on to the subcommittee at our next meeting. Basically, this is to increase student performance. And then I guess lastly, it's just how do we use this data and how do we use this information? And as Lori mentioned, at our next school committee meeting, we take this information, we meet as a team, principals meet with teachers and buildings, and we plan our school improvement plans take into account all of this information. We analyze it in grade level teams to determine where we're serving individual students well, where we still need to grow with individual students, but we also look at groups of students and how well we are serving groups of students or where we need to grow. And we use this information to adjust our instructional strategies, but we also use this information to adjust our resources. And then school-wide teaching and learning teams meet to analyze benchmark assessments. So this is kind of a little bit of going off on a little bit of a sidebar trajectory. So this starts, the statewide assessment really starts the year for us, and then we take that information and we use it, and we monitor how students are doing throughout the year by benchmarking them in these areas, these three primary areas. Questions?
I have a question. Have parents received their information about their individual children's progress?
Yes.
Okay. And any feedback? No.
Principals would have a better sense of feedback. I was surprised that we didn't receive maybe more feedback, particularly, did you receive feedback, Erin, on the high school?
No, the only thing that was a wrinkle for us, and it was for every high school in the state, is we had to offer up the opportunity to retest due to the controversial English question. So there was some increased dialogue about that. I think we ended up having about 6 or 7 students do that out of many students who were eligible to do that, to basically try to get a better score, to try for the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship, basically. But that was pretty much the dialogue or feedback we got from parents, was whether or not they wanted their kids to do that. We didn't get much else.
And do you have a lot of students who opt out of taking the state tests?
I had one last year.
We have 0, but it counts for graduation.
Yes.
Very big incentive.
I had one opt out of one of the 3 tests too. I mean, it wasn't, she didn't opt out.
Sometimes people explore the conversation, but usually the principals are able to navigate that and explain the ultimate value.
I think moving to a computer-based assessment has made the assessment in some ways more accessible to students, and we kind of worked our way through the glitches because we went computer-based before a lot of other districts did. So now it's pretty routine for them, and there are some capabilities that they can access that they like. So sometimes, if they really struggle with reading, they can actually hear the test read to them, or sometimes they can hear a math test read to them, and that's necessary to really get a good understanding of their understanding of math concepts. So I think it's, in some ways, students struggle less with sitting through these tests because I think they're designed to be more accessible for our students, for all students in Massachusetts.
They've also are much shorter, and this year they've actually reduced the ELA to make it a little shorter again.
And the
So,
kids are getting used to them too.
Yeah.
They
I
understand.
mean, it's still a couple hours, but
Yeah.
before it was all day. So,
I will add, at Wacona, it was our first year with the computer-based testing, and the adults were more anxious about it than the students, because the students had experienced before and we hadn't. So it's hard for teachers to coach students up on how to take the computer-based test, having never really seen it before. But the students certainly made up for that. But also, it went far smoother than I expected for 2 reasons. Joe Sturgis did a lot of groundwork for us to get us set up, and our Mcas coordinator, Pete Anderson, did as well. So the glitches that we were ready for, literally sitting in the hallways ready for, were not nearly what we thought would happen. So
and
it
those
went
kids
far
had
smoother.
taken it
Yeah,
computerized
the
before.
the kids handled it far better than the adults. Yeah.
And we've been doing computer-based, and I think it's our third or fourth year at the elementary level doing computer-based. The kids don't even blink, you know.
Well, what about third graders? I mean, this is the first time they're taking.
Yep, but they've had their Chromebooks for a couple of years. Our Eureka program, we make sure they do some testing online as well as, they don't have a problem with it, so.
I think they take the Eduelastics
Yep,
test, which
Eduelastic,
is very
right.
closely aligned to what
Right.
Mcas looks like. So they have that practice and we can navigate using the tools and work out some of that stuff.
Well, that was certainly a lot of information. Thank you for the presentation. My head is spinning. So, yeah, a lot. Well, congratulations and well done. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I think it was a good pitch. I'm not saying I understood everything, but it was a good pitch, and it sounds like you're on top of our problems. And I think you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Very pleased with
And
the approach,
And
the
this
whole
gives us,
performance.
yeah, soaring, so that's wonderful.
And
Thank you.
compliments I understand the principals that are doing a lot of the work.
Yes. A lot of good coaching going on, so thank you.
Debbie, she's probably working on something, I guarantee.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know.
We're talking about you, Debbie.
It's so classic.
She's done a great day.
I stayed quiet for so long.
So, that concludes the superintendent's reports. And any personnel changes? None? Okay.
Seems that everyone's still here.
Okay, is there any old business? New business? I'd like to make a remark for the good of the committee. I had the good fortune to go see Arsenic and Old Lace at the high school, and I was so impressed with the quality. So kudos, Mr. Roth, for a great job there. Thank you. And I saw Leslie there and Rich there, and yeah, it was really good.
It was impressive. The set was amazing, and it was so professional. Honestly, I felt like the entertainment was as good as going downtown to
Berkshire Theater
Berkshire
Group.
Theater Group.
Right.
It was just amazing. Kids did an unbelievable job.
I saw it last year at the Unicorn Theater in Stockbridge. It was the same quality, really. It was wonderful. And then I heard that somebody had, this was their first time. Aaron, you told me that
Yeah, one of our main characters had never acted before.
I mean, really impressive.
Nice job.
Yeah. So, may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Well,
We need to go on.
Oh, right, executive session.
Thank you.
Whereas the Paraprofessional Unit of the Central Berkshire Education Association on November 12th ratified a settlement agreement between that unit and the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee to be incorporated into a contract for the period July 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2022. Be it resolved that the Central Berkshire Regional School Committee ratify the settlement agreement between the Paraprofessional Unit of the Central Berkshire Education Association and the School Committee to be incorporated into a contract for the period July 1, 2019 through June 30th, 2022, as recommended by the committee's bargaining team.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries.
Move to adjourn.
And a motion to adjourn. Okay, we have a second and a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.